Something is inside your house right now. You just haven't heard it yet. Every story you're about to hear is real people, real sounds, no explanations. Some of them called the police. Some of them never went back. If you've ever heard something at night and told yourself it was nothing, you should probably keep watching. Welcome to Unheard Fears. First story tonight comes from Marlene, 54, out in rural Harlan County, Kentucky. She submitted this about 3 weeks ago and then sent a follow-up email that just said, "Please don't use my last name. My daughter reads these." Here it is. I'm going to tell you the strange part first, because if I build up to it the way things actually happened, I'll lose you somewhere around night 2 and you'll think I'm just a woman who heard a pipe. The thing responded to my voice. That's the part one can't get around. Everything else, the sound, the wall, the hole I cut, all of that has explanations I could live with. But the part where I stood in my own kitchen talking out loud to nobody and physically felt, the sound shift every time I opened my mouth, that part one cannot sand down into something comfortable. I've tried for 4 years. Gerald was out at one of his project sites. He does this maybe 4 times a year, a week or so at a stretch, and in 11 years of living in that farmhouse I had never once felt uneasy there alone. That house is old and it sounds like an old house. The back porch door has a specific complaint it makes when the wind comes from the northeast. The step at the bottom of the stairs will tell you exactly where your foot landed on it. I knew all of it. I had cataloged all of it without meaning to, the way you do with a place you've lived long enough. So when I first heard the dripping, I didn't think anything of it. Kitchen corner, near the mudroom. I was sitting with tea I'd stopped drinking, looking at nothing. There it was, steady. I knocked on the wall, knuckles 3 times, pressed my hand flat against the drywall. Felt nothing wrong. Filed it away. I want to tell you it got dramatic fast, but it didn't. It just kept going. Same corner, same pace, and I kept not dealing with it the way you don't deal with things when your husband's been gone 3 days and you're tired and there's always something else to do. I kept a kind of mental tab on it. Night 1, 2, 3. My neighbor Dale came over on day 4. I want to describe Dale accurately because he matters to this story in a small way. Dale is a man who has strong opinions about the right way to do things, not arrogant, just certain. He can look at a wall and tell you what's behind it the way some people can read a face. He came in, put his hand on the wall, knocked on it in a few places, got down on one knee and pulled the baseboard back with a flathead. He shone his phone light in the gap and was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up and said, "Nothing's wet in there. Not, I can't find anything. Not, could be a hairline crack somewhere." He said nothing's wet, and the way he said it, like he'd been expecting one thing and found something that wasn't the opposite of it, just something else entirely. That was the first time I felt something other than mild annoyance about the whole situation. He left without making a joke about it. Dale always makes a joke. He didn't. That night I was on the phone with my sister Carol, standing in the kitchen, and I was mid-sentence about something that had nothing to do with any of this. And I noticed, not all at once, but the way you notice something your brain has been processing for a few seconds already, that the dripping had quickened. I stopped talking. It slowed. I said something to Carol. Quickened again. I said, "Carol, hold on a second." And I stood there and I talked. I recited things. A grocery list. The lyrics to a song I half remembered. I counted backward from 50. And the whole time it moved with me. Not in a way I could explain as acoustics or resonance or vibration, because I know what those things feel like and this wasn't that. It was like the difference between a door that swings shut because of a draft and a door that someone pulls closed. One of those is physics. The other one is intent. I told Carol there was something wrong with the pipes and got off the phone. That was a Wednesday. I don't remember Friday very well. I know I slept on the couch because I didn't want to be in the bedroom with the kitchen wall on the other side, which looking back makes no logical sense because walls don't work that way. But fear doesn't run on logic, it runs on geometry, and the geometry of being close to that wall felt wrong. My dog Butter. She's old, mostly deaf, doesn't startle at anything. She slept on the couch with me, and at one point around 2 in the morning, she lifted her head and stared toward the kitchen for about 30 seconds. Then she put her head back down. I lay there for a long time after that. I cut a hole in the wall on Saturday. I want to be straight with you. I was not frightened at that moment in the way you might expect. I was something closer to furious. I needed it to be a pipe. I needed there to be a wet, cracked, stupid, ordinary pipe on the other side of that drywall, and I was going to find it and I was going to have Gerald deal with it when he got back, and that was going to be the end of it. I got a box cutter and I cut a clean rectangle about the size of a piece of paper and I pulled the section out. Insulation, a stud, some wiring. Everything was dry. The dripping continued. I stood there holding a piece of my own wall in my hand and I just started laughing. Not a good laugh. More like the sound a person makes when a situation has officially become absurd. I put the drywall piece on the counter and went to bed. Gerald came home Tuesday. I didn't meet him in the driveway with some big emotional moment. I was in the kitchen when he came in, and I said, "Before you ask about the hole in the wall, I need to tell you something." And I told him. Gerald is a practical man and a good listener, and when I finished he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "Has it done it since Saturday?" I said I didn't know. I'd been avoiding the kitchen. He nodded like that was reasonable. It hasn't made a sound since. Gerald patched the drywall himself about a month after. I didn't fight him on it. I stood in the doorway and watched him do it, and I felt, I don't know how to describe this without sounding unhinged, guilty, almost like something had been waiting a long time to be heard, and I'd finally given it 5 days of my full attention, and now it was done with me. Or I was done with it. I don't believe in that kind of thing. I want to be honest about that. I'm a practical woman from a practical family, and we don't lean toward the mystical. But I also spent 3 decades in a trauma ward, and I will tell you flat out that there are things that happen in that building. Small things, quiet things, things you only notice at 4 in the morning, that I have never been able to explain with the tools available to me. Some things are just outside the edge of what we can account for. The wall is patched now. The kitchen looks fine. I still time my silences in there, though, without meaning to. Old habit, I guess. Marlene sent one more email after she submitted that. Came at 11:50 at night. It just said, "It started again last week. Gerald doesn't know. I haven't told him. I don't have a joke for that. Moving on."
My name is Claudette, and I need to tell you something about the kind of tired I was dealing with before any of this started, because it matters to how long it took me to trust what I was hearing. I run a high school, not teach, run. I am the person teachers come to when a parent is screaming in the hallway. I am the person who sits across from a 16-year-old at 7 in the morning and tries to figure out why they haven't been home in 3 days. I am the person who absorbs everything and shows nothing and drives home at 7 in the evening and eats dinner standing over the sink because sitting down feels like a commitment I don't have energy for. I say all of this not to complain. I say it because by the time I started hearing the voices, I had already spent 2 months telling myself I was just overtired, that I was hearing things because my brain was running on fumes. That explanation held for a while. Then it didn't. I moved into the row house in late August. Semi-detached, which means I share one wall with the property next door. The realtor mentioned the neighboring house was between tenants. Vacant for a few months, she said. Nothing to worry about, she said. I didn't think twice about it. The first time I heard it I was in bed, maybe 11 at night, lights off, that specific kind of exhausted where your body is done but your brain is still filing paperwork. And through the shared wall to my left I heard what sounded like a dinner party. Not loud. Not through the floor at a college party loud. Just present. The low overlap of multiple voices talking at the same time. The occasional laugh. Something that might have been a glass being set on a hard surface. The sounds of people who were comfortable, who had been in the same room together for hours and had moved past the formal part of the evening into something looser. I lay there for a moment and thought, new tenants. The realtor was wrong about the timeline, or they moved in early, or someone was staying there temporarily. I put my pillow over my head and went to sleep. It happened again the next night, and the one after that. Now here is where I have to be honest with you about something. I did not investigate immediately, and the reason is embarrassing. I was so tired, and the sound was so domestic, so ordinary, that some part of my brain just filed it under neighbors and moved on. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't even particularly annoying. It was just the sound of people living their lives on the other side of a wall, which is what you sign up for when you buy a row house. I had bigger problems. I let it go. This went on for almost 3 weeks. The night it stopped feeling ordinary was a Tuesday. I came home later than usual, close to 9, and the house was quiet in that specific way houses get quiet when you've been out all day. That settled, held-breath stillness. I made tea. I sat down. And then through the wall it started. The same as always, the overlapping voices, the warmth of it, the clinking. And something shifted in me. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling you get when you're reading a document and a number doesn't add up and you go back and read it again and it still doesn't add up. I put my cup down and I sat very still and I listened. Really listened for the first time. And what I noticed, what I could not unnotice once I'd noticed it, was that I could not make out a single word. Not one. 3 weeks of what sounded like conversation and I could not isolate a syllable. It was the shape of talking without the substance of it. The rhythm of a dinner party with nothing inside the rhythm. I told myself that was just walls. That's just how sound travels through drywall and insulation. That's physics. I called the property management company the next morning. Told them I could hear my neighbors clearly through the shared wall and asked when they'd moved in. The woman on the phone put me on hold for a long time. When she came back, she said the property was still vacant. No tenants, no showing scheduled, no contractors working on it. Vacant since April. I said, "I'm sorry, that's not possible. I've been hearing people in there for 3 weeks." She said, "Ma'am, the property is vacant." That was the end of that conversation. I want to tell you I did something decisive after that call. I want to tell you I marched next door and knocked and demanded answers. What I actually did was stand in my kitchen for about 4 minutes and then go to work because I had a disciplinary meeting at 8:30 that I could not reschedule. That's the truth. Life doesn't pause for the things that unsettle you. You just carry them around. But I started paying attention differently after that. I started noting the time when it started. Always between 9 and 10 at night. I started noticing it never happened on weekends, or at least I never caught it on weekends, though that might be because I slept differently on weekends, not listening the same way. I started pressing my ear to the wall, which felt insane, which felt like something I would never in my professional life admit to doing, and which told me nothing except that the sound was definitely coming from that side and definitely sounded like people. 6 weeks after I moved in, I finally walked around and knocked on the neighbor's front door. It opened. Not all the way. Maybe 8 inches. And standing in the gap was a woman, late 30s, looking at me with the particular expression of someone who was not expecting a knock, but was not entirely surprised by one either. Behind her, I could see a hallway with shoes lined up along the wall, and a coat rack with several jackets on it, and the warm yellow light of a lamp somewhere deeper in the house. I introduced myself, told her I was next door. She nodded slowly. I said I wanted to talk about the noise coming through the shared wall at night. She opened the door wider and I could hear, from somewhere in the back of the house, the sound of a television and children's voices and someone running water in a kitchen. The full house. Family. She was apologetic. They had been there since June, she said. Her husband, herself, for children, and her mother-in-law who visited on weekends. They hadn't realized the sound carried like that. She was genuinely sorry. We talked for maybe 10 minutes and I left feeling foolish and relieved in equal measure. I want to tell you that was the end of it. I got home, made tea, sat down, and started running the numbers in my head, the way I always do. The property management company told me the house had been vacant since April. This woman told me her family moved in June. There was a 2-month gap that didn't add up, but that was nothing. Management companies lose track of things, paperwork gets delayed. It was probably just an administrative error. That's what I told myself. Then I went back through my own memory. I moved in late August. I started hearing the voices within the first week. The family, by the woman's own account, had been there since June. That lined up. That made sense. A family of 6 evenings together, sound carrying through a shared wall. All of it made complete sense. Except for the 3 days I heard it before I moved in. I had come to the house twice before closing. Once for a final walkthrough, once to drop off a carload of boxes the weekend before my move-in date. Both times I had been in the house in the evening. Both times I remembered now, standing in my kitchen with cold tea. I had heard something through that wall. I had thought it was street noise. I had not thought about it again until this moment. I stood there for a long time. The family next door is real. I have spoken to them several times since. They are kind people and the sound does carry and there is nothing strange about any of it. I have made my peace with the noise. I have not made my peace with what I heard before they were there to make it. I have turned that over many times. I have looked for the explanation that makes it disappear. I have not found it. I probably won't. Some things just stay in the gap between what happened and what could have. I still listen, though. At night, when the house gets quiet, I still listen to make sure the sound I'm hearing is the right sound. The one with people inside it. So far, it always has been. So far. That last line she sent as a separate message, 3 hours after the original submission. Just those 2 words. I don't think she was being dramatic. I think she meant it exactly the way it sounds. On to the next one.
My name is Philip, and I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I work with sound for a living. Not music, not podcasts. I sit in a treated room with high-end monitoring equipment, and I listen to things other people cannot hear. I catch the hum of a refrigerator 3 rooms away bleeding into a vocal track. I hear the difference between a room that has carpet and a room that doesn't, just from the way someone's breath sounds on a recording. I say this not to impress you, but because I need you to understand that when something audio-related unsettles me, it is not because I don't know what I'm hearing. It is because I know exactly what I'm hearing, and it should not be there. The house is a townhouse end unit, which means I only share one wall, and that wall belongs to a retired couple who go to bed at 9 and own a cat. I have worked from home for 6 years. I know every sound this building makes the way a surgeon knows the inside of a body they've opened before. I know which pipes knock when the upstairs neighbor runs her shower. I know the exact frequency the HVAC system cycles through when it kicks on in the morning. I know all of it. I have cataloged all of it without trying to, the way you do when your job is listening and you can't turn it off when you come home because you are already home. So when I heard the humming, I knew immediately what it wasn't. It wasn't the HVAC. It wasn't a pipe resonating. It wasn't bleed from a neighbor's television or a phone left playing something in another room. I knew all of those sounds. This was not any of them. Came from the floor vent in my home office. The one directly under my desk. I first heard it on a Tuesday afternoon in early March, just sitting there working, and I remember the exact moment because I stopped typing mid-sentence and just sat very still the way you do when your ears catch something your brain needs a second to process. It was a child's voice, humming. Not a song I recognized, not a nursery rhyme, not anything with a clear melodic structure. Just a phrase, 4 or 5 notes, repeated, wandering and unhurried. The way a child hums when they are alone and have forgotten anyone can hear them. I have no children. I am not married. The townhouse below mine is a ground floor unit currently occupied by a woman in her 50s who lives alone and does not, to my knowledge, have grandchildren visiting on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I got down on the floor and put my ear to the vent. The humming continued, close enough that I could hear the specific quality of it. Not recorded, not mechanical, not filtered through multiple walls. Direct, present, like someone sitting just below the grate. I want to tell you my professional instincts kicked in and I handled it calmly. What actually happened is I stood up too fast and hit my elbow on the underside of my desk and stood there in the middle of my office for about 30 seconds doing nothing, which is my version of panic. Then I did what I always do with sounds I can't immediately identify. I got my equipment. I pulled a small condenser microphone and pointed it at the vent and recorded 4 minutes of audio. Then I sat down and put my headphones on and listened back. And there it was, clean, clear, no distortion, no artifact. A child humming 4 or 5 notes in a pattern that repeated 7 times over the course of those 4 minutes and then stopped. Just stopped, mid-phrase, the way a child stops when they get distracted by something else. I sat with my headphones on for a long time after it stopped, listening to the silence in the vent the way you listen to a phone line after someone hangs up. Just to be sure, I called my HVAC company the next morning, told them I was hearing something unusual coming through my floor vent and wanted the ducts inspected. The technician who came out was a man named, and I remember this specifically because it struck me as funny at the time, a man named Roy who had the energy of someone who had heard every possible complaint a homeowner could make and was professionally incapable of being surprised by any of them. He spent 40 minutes going through the ductwork with a light and a camera on a flexible cable. He found nothing. No blockage, no animal activity, no moisture, no structural abnormality. He showed me the camera footage on his phone, scrolling through it like a man showing you vacation photos he's mildly bored by. Clean ducts, he said. Whatever you're hearing, it's not coming from in here. He was packing up his kit by the door when he stopped. Not a dramatic stop, just the particular stillness of a person whose body has made a decision before their brain has caught up with it. He was looking at the floor vent in the hallway. I asked him if he'd found something. He said no. He picked up his bag and left. I watched him walk to his van from my front window. He sat in the van for about 4 minutes before he drove away. I don't know what that means. I have thought about it many times. The humming came back twice more that week. Same vent, same phrase, same quality of sound. Always in the afternoon, always between 2 and 4, always stopping mid-phrase as if something had interrupted it. I recorded all of it. By the third recording, I had noticed something that I had missed the first time because I had been listening to the wrong thing. I had been listening to the melody. I should have been listening to the room. There was reverb in the recording. Not much, a small, brief tail of it after each phrase. And the character of that reverb told me something specific. It told me the sound was not originating inside the ductwork. It was originating in a larger space and traveling into the ductwork from below. A room, not a pipe. Something with walls and a ceiling and enough cubic footage to give a child's voice a little bit of space to breathe in. My townhouse has no basement. There is a concrete slab foundation, and below that, as far as I knew, there is nothing. I called my landlord, asked him directly, is there any kind of subfloor space, crawl space, any kind of void beneath the ground floor unit? He said no. Concrete slab, poured in 1987, nothing below it. I asked him about the history of the property. He said it was a standard residential development, nothing unusual, built on what used to be farmland. I went back to my recordings. I went back to the reverb. I sat with it for a long time, and then I did something I am a little embarrassed to admit. I posted a short clip online, no context, no explanation, just the audio, and asked if anyone recognized the melody. I expected nothing. I expected 1 or 2 people to suggest it was a nursery rhyme I didn't know, or to tell me my HVAC was haunted, the usual internet responses. What I got, about 14 hours later, was a message from a woman who said she recognized it. She said it was a fragment of a lullaby. She gave me the name of it. She said it was Eastern European in origin, specific to a region she named, and that it was not widely known outside of communities with roots there. She asked me where I had heard it. I have no connection to that part of the world. I had never heard that melody before it came through my floor vent. I could not have been mishearing something else as that specific fragment. I am an audio engineer. My ears do not do that. I sat with this information for about a week. I did not go back to my office much that week. I worked from the kitchen table, which felt ridiculous, which I did anyway. What I did next I did on a Thursday evening when I had run out of ways to avoid it. I went down to the ground floor unit and knocked on my downstairs neighbor's door and asked her, as casually as I could manage, how long she had lived there. 12 years, she said. I asked her if she knew anything about the unit's history before she moved in. She thought about it and said she believed a young family had lived there, a couple with a daughter. She didn't know what had happened to them or why they'd left. She said she'd inherited a few things they hadn't taken when she moved in. Some kitchen items, a box of miscellaneous things she'd never gone through. She pointed to a shelf near her door. On the shelf, half visible behind a stack of books, was a small cloth figure. Handmade, the kind of thing a child makes or receives when they are very young. I am not going to tell you I felt something when I saw it because I don't want to sound like I'm writing a horror story. I will tell you that I noted it and said goodnight and went back upstairs and sat in my office for the first time in a week and listened. The vent was quiet. It has been quiet since that Thursday. 3 months now. I still record ambient audio in there sometimes, early in the morning before I start work, the way you check a door you know you locked. Just to be sure. So far, nothing. But I'll tell you what I did do. I left my office window cracked open that Thursday night. I don't know why exactly. It just felt like the right thing. Like leaving a light on for someone. I still leave it cracked. Even in winter. Some sounds, once you've really heard them, you don't want to be the one who closed the window on them. That is the only submission I have ever received from someone who apologized at the end for not having a cleaner explanation. He said, and I'm quoting directly here, "I know this doesn't resolve. I'm sorry. I just needed someone else to know it happened. Philip, we know."
My name is Renata, and the first thing I want to say is that my daughter is fine. She is healthy. She is safe. She sleeps in her own bed without any trouble. I need you to hold on to that while I tell you this, because some of what I'm about to describe involves her directly and it gets uncomfortable before it gets resolved. She is fine. Okay, here we go. We moved into the split level in September. My husband Dale had taken a new position. We had about 3 weeks to find a place. This house checked every box. Good school district, big yard, a bedroom for our daughter Maisie on the upper level with a window that looked out over a maple tree she immediately decided was hers. She named the tree the first day, standing at the window with her shoes still on. I won't tell you what she named it. That detail feels like hers to keep, especially now. But she named it within the first 10 minutes of being in that house, which tells you the kind of kid she is. The attic access is a pull-down panel in the hallway ceiling, between our room and Maisie's. We used it once to store boxes when we moved in and then forgot about it completely. It's the kind of thing you stop seeing after a while. It's just part of the ceiling. The first 3 weeks were completely normal. We were busy the way you're always busy after a move. Finding the nearest grocery store, figuring out the commute, unpacking in whatever order felt most urgent that day. Maisie started at her new school and came home every afternoon with that specific exhaustion of a kid who has been working hard at making friends all day. She was adjusting. We all were. Around week 4, I started hearing the tapping. Wednesday night, lying in bed, Dale already asleep. A soft sound from above. Not rhythmic, not a pattern, just occasional. The kind of knock you might hear if a branch was brushing against a roof in light wind. Except it was a clear night. I lay there and listened, and it stopped after a couple of minutes, and I told myself it was the house settling, and I went to sleep. Thursday night, Friday night, always after midnight, always soft, always stopping on its own within a few minutes. Always from the same place, not above the living room, not above the kitchen. Above the hallway, directly above the attic panel. I didn't tell Dale yet. I know how that sounds. But I want to explain why, because it wasn't denial. It was strategy. Dale is a man who responds to problems by solving them immediately, and I wasn't ready for the solving part yet. I knew what would happen. He'd pull down the ladder, go up with his phone light, spend 10 minutes up there, come back down and say probably squirrels, and then go to sleep feeling like the matter was closed. And I'd be lying there still listening, with no more information than I'd started with, except now Dale thought it was handled. I wanted to know more before I handed it over. I wanted to be sure of what I was dealing with. So instead of telling Dale, I started paying closer attention to Maisie. She had been drawing obsessively since she could hold a crayon. Filled notebooks, taped things to her walls, drew on the back of grocery receipts if that was what was available. This was not new. What changed starting around week 5 was what she kept drawing. The same figure, over and over. I noticed it the way you notice something that's been in front of you for a while before your brain decides to flag it, gradually and then all at once. A tall shape, stretched out the way kids draw things when they want you to understand something is very tall and they haven't quite figured out how to show it yet. No face, always standing in a doorway or just at the edge of a frame, half in and half out of a space. I asked her about it the way you ask a 6-year-old about their drawings, sitting next to her, casual, not making it a thing. I pointed to the figure and said, "Who's that?" She didn't look up. She said, "The one who taps." I kept my voice even. I asked her what she meant by that. She said he tapped at night, above her room, and that sometimes she could hear him moving around up there. She said it the way she might tell me what she had for lunch. Completely matter of fact. Not scared, not performing, just passing along information she assumed I probably already had. I said, "Okay, thanks for telling me the way you say things to children when you need 30 seconds to decide what your face is doing." Then I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and stood over the sink for a while. That night I told Dale. He pulled down the attic ladder and went up and spent 10 minutes moving around while I stood in the hallway below listening to his footsteps cross the floor above me. He came down and said he found nothing. No animal, no droppings, no signs of anything living up there. Just our boxes and the insulation and some old wiring. House settling, he said. Old houses do this. He pushed the ladder back up and went to bed. I stood in the hallway under that panel for a long time after he turned off the light. The next week, Maisie drew the figure outside. Not in a doorway anymore, in the backyard, standing near the fence line. The week after that, she drew it at a window. She brought that one to me herself, held it up while I was making dinner. Proud of it the way she gets proud when she thinks she's drawn something accurately. I looked at it for a moment. The figure was at a window looking in. I asked her which window. She pointed at the one above the kitchen sink. Ground level, facing the backyard. I called Dale at work that afternoon and told him I needed him to go back into the attic on Saturday and look at every single corner this time and not come down until he had. He was up there for almost 20 minutes. When he came down, his face was different. Not scared. More like the face of a person who went looking for one thing and found something else entirely and hasn't caught up with it yet. In the far corner, behind the water heater housing, someone had pulled back a section of insulation and laid it flat to make a space. In that space, a sleeping bag, old and flattened, a small backpack. Inside the backpack, 2 cans of food, a flashlight, a prepaid phone with a cracked screen, a plastic water bottle, and set to one side, neatly, side by side like someone had placed them at the end of a long day, a pair of worn work boots, size 11. Someone had been living in our attic. We called the police that morning. They came and documented everything and took the phone and the backpack. They found where the person had been getting in, a vent panel on the exterior of the house, the screening cut cleanly and reattached with tape each time so it looked untouched from the outside. Not a break-in. Careful work. Practiced. The phone was completely wiped. No data, no contacts, nothing. Forensics pulled fingerprints from the sleeping bag and the water bottle. No match in any database they ran it through. Whoever this person was, they existed nowhere on record. No criminal history, no prior arrests, no file of any kind. Just a size 11 pair of boots and a sleeping bag and a cracked phone with nothing on it. The officer who led the walkthrough asked us when we first noticed the sounds. I told him around week 4. He looked at the setup, the food, the organization of it, the careful way everything was arranged, and said that in his experience, based on what he was looking at, whoever had been there had likely been there much longer than a month. He said possibly since before we moved in. Possibly since before we moved in. I have turned that sentence over more times than I can count. The idea that we arrived into a space that was already being used. That while we were signing papers and scheduling movers and Maisie was picking out paint colors for her room, there was already someone above the hallway ceiling, already settled, already quiet, already waiting to see who was coming. Maisie has not drawn that figure since we left the house. Not once. She's never brought it up, and I haven't either. She's 6 years old, and she has moved on completely, the way young children move on when they haven't yet learned to hold on to the things that frighten them. I'm 36. I've learned. I still hold on to the boots. Not literally, the police kept everything. But I mean the image of them, placed so carefully, side by side. The way you set your shoes down when you're home, when you're comfortable, when you're somewhere you've decided is yours. That's the part that never leaves. Not the tapping, not the drawings. The boots placed neatly, in a corner of a house that was never his to settle into. The officer's line is what gets me every time I read this. Possibly since before you moved in. Just sitting there at the end of a sentence like it's a normal thing to say to a family.
My name is Sasha, and I want to start by telling you that I am not someone who gets scared easily. Not in the way that means I'm brave. More in the way that means I grew up in a loud house with 4 brothers, and I learned pretty early that most things that go bump in the night are just your brother Kyle doing something stupid in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. I came into that rental house with zero anxiety about living in a basement. I actually preferred it. Cheaper rent. No upstairs neighbors walking on my ceiling. My own little corner of the house where I could close the door and exist without anyone bothering me. That was the dream. That was exactly what I thought I was getting. The house was a standard student rental. 3 floors including the basement for bedrooms, 1 bathroom per floor, the kind of place that gets repainted every few years in the same shade of off-white without anyone ever fixing the things underneath the paint. My room was at the bottom of the basement stairs, past the laundry area, next to the water heater. The realtor, and I use that word loosely, she was more of a property manager who seemed mildly irritated by her own job, showed me the room in about 4 minutes and handed me a key before I'd finished asking questions. The water heater is old, but it works, she said. You'll hear it sometimes at night. Completely normal. I moved in on a Friday in late September. My roommates were 3 other girls, all of them on the floors above me, all of them friendly in the way college housemates are friendly when you first arrive, helpful with the heavy boxes, vague about everything else. I set up my room, put my bed against the far wall, hung a tapestry over the one window that looked out at ground level onto the side yard. It smelled a little strange down there. Not bad exactly, just old and closed in like a room that hadn't had its window opened in a long time. I burned a candle and told myself it would air out. It didn't really air out, but I stopped noticing it after a few days, which is its own kind of answer, I guess. The first 3 weeks were fine. I slept well, I liked having my own space, I liked the quiet of being below everyone else. The water heater made noise the way the property manager said it would. A low cycling sound when it kicked on, a settling sound when it finished. I cataloged it the way you catalog the sounds of a new place and filed it away and stopped hearing it consciously. Background. Normal. Fine. I want to tell you exactly when it stopped being fine, because the timeline matters. It was a Tuesday night in mid-October. I had an exam the next morning and I'd been studying until around 1 and I turned off my lamp and lay in the dark and started doing that thing where you tell yourself to sleep knowing full well your brain has other plans. The room was quiet. The water heater had finished its last cycle maybe 20 minutes earlier. Everything was settled. And then I heard breathing. Not my own. I want to be specific about that because the first thing everyone says when I tell this story is maybe it was just you, and I understand why they say that, but I know the difference between the sound of my own breathing and the sound of something else breathing in the same room as me. My breathing was in my chest, close, the rhythm I've known my whole life. This was across the room, near the water heater, slower than mine, heavier than mine, with a specific quality to it. A slight roughness on the exhale, like someone breathing through a mouth that had been dry for a long time. I did not move. I want to be honest about that. I did not sit up and turn on the light and investigate. I lay completely still with my eyes open in the dark and I listened and I told myself it was the water heater finishing a cycle and I almost believed it and then it happened again and I didn't believe it at all. I turned on my lamp. The room was empty. Of course it was empty. I checked the corners, I checked under the bed, I checked the small closet by the door. Empty, empty, empty. The water heater stood in the corner the way it always had, squat and indifferent. I left the lamp on and lay back down and stared at the ceiling for a long time and eventually fell asleep with the light on, which I had not done since I was about 7 years old. Now here is where I have to tell you something about the weeks that followed, because I don't want to skip over them the way people skip over the middle of a horror story to get to the part that sounds impressive. The middle is the part that actually broke me down. It happened again Thursday, again the following Monday. Not every night, that's important. If it had been every night, I think I would have acted faster. But it was sporadic enough that I kept finding ways to explain it away. The water heater, the pipes, sound traveling down through the floors from my roommates' rooms above. I had a list of explanations and I rotated through them and each one held up just long enough to get me through the night and then fell apart by morning. I started sleeping badly. Not in a dramatic way, just the slow degradation of someone who is not fully resting because some part of them is staying alert. I started being tired in a way that felt different from normal tired. Heavier, harder to shake. I mentioned to my roommate Deja that I was having trouble sleeping and she said probably just adjusting to the basement. It's darker down there, your body gets confused. I nodded and said yeah, probably that. I did not tell her about the breathing. I don't know exactly why. Partly because I knew how it would sound. Partly because I hadn't fully admitted it to myself yet. There is a specific kind of not telling that is less about hiding something from other people and more about not making it real by saying it out loud. I was doing that kind. Around week 5, I bought a voice recorder. A cheap one, the kind students use for lectures. I I set it on the shelf across from my bed, pointed it toward the water heater corner, and I pressed record before I turned off the lamp. I told myself I was being logical. I told myself I was going to capture the water heater cycling and prove to myself that that was all it was and then sleep properly again. I recorded 4 nights before I got something. The 4th night, I played it back in the morning with my headphones in, sitting on the edge of my bed before my roommates were awake. I listened to about 40 minutes of silence and the normal sounds of the house settling and the water heater doing its thing. And then, at 3:04 in the morning, there it was. Slow, heavy, the slight roughness on the exhale, lasting about 90 seconds and then stopping cleanly, the way breathing stops when someone decides to hold it. I sat on the edge of my bed with my headphones in and I listened to it 3 times. Then I called my property manager. She was not receptive. That is the most neutral way I can put it. I told her I had audio of something in my room and I needed someone to come look at the water heater, and she told me the water heater had been serviced 8 months ago and was in perfect working order. I said I didn't think it was the water heater. She said, "What do you think it is then?" I didn't have a good answer for that, so I said I didn't know, but I wanted someone to come look, and she said she'd put in a request and someone would be in touch. Nobody was in touch for 11 days. In those 11 days, I moved my mattress to the living room upstairs and told my roommates I was having an allergic reaction to something in the basement, which was not entirely a lie because something about being in that room had started making me feel genuinely unwell. Headaches in the morning, a low-grade nausea I couldn't shake, a fogginess that sat behind my eyes from the moment I woke up. I thought I was getting sick from stress. I had a paper due, I had the exam situation, I figured my body was just running low. Plumber came on day 11. Not because the property manager sent him, because the hot water in the whole house stopped working and my roommate Cass called the emergency maintenance line and made it clear she was not interested in waiting. He was in the basement for about 15 minutes. When he came up, he asked which one of us had the room down there. I said me. He looked at me for a moment and then said very carefully that the water heater had a cracked valve and had been leaking carbon monoxide into the basement room, probably for several weeks. He said the levels weren't high enough to be immediately dangerous, but they were high enough, over time, with the door closed, with the small window I rarely opened, to cause headaches, disrupted sleep, cognitive fog. And auditory disturbances, he said. That's one of the symptoms. You can hear things that aren't there. I stood in the kitchen and I nodded and I said, "Okay, thank you," and he went back downstairs to fix the valve. I want to tell you I felt relieved. And I did partly. The headaches made sense. The fog made sense. The bad sleep made sense. But I kept coming back to the recording. Because here is the thing about carbon monoxide and auditory disturbances. It causes you to perceive sounds incorrectly. It can make a mechanical noise sound like something else. It can make your own heartbeat sound external. These are documented effects, and I looked all of them up and I understand them. What it does not do, as far as I have been able to find, is create a sound on a recording that wasn't there. The recorder doesn't breathe. The recorder doesn't have a circulatory system. The recorder doesn't get confused by a gas in the air. I still have the file. I've listened to it more times than I should have. 90 seconds of something slow and heavy and deliberate, at 3:04 in the morning, in a room the plumber confirmed had been quietly filling with a gas that makes you hear things. One of those facts cancels out the other one. I just haven't figured out which one yet. She attached the audio file to her submission. I listened to it once and left it alone. That's it. Clean stop. Ready to write story 6 whenever you are.
This one is from an electrician in Bend, Oregon, 47 years old. Just him and his teenage son in a 2-story Craftsman. Here it is. My name is Terry, and I need you to understand something about the way I am wired before I tell you this story. I have spent 23 years finding things that are wrong inside houses. Not the obvious things, I mean the things hiding inside walls, inside ceilings, inside the parts of a structure that nobody looks at until something stops working. I find them, every time. That is not a boast. It is just the truth of what 23 years of this work does to a person. You develop a relationship with the hidden mechanics of a building. You learn to read a house the way some people read faces. I say all of this because I need you to feel the weight of what I am about to tell you, which is that I looked at everything inside that house and I could not find a single thing wrong with it. And the sound kept coming anyway. My son Owen was 16 when we moved in. Just the two of us in a two-story Craftsman on a quiet street, older construction, the kind of house that has been standing long enough to feel permanent. Owen took the upstairs bedroom at the end of the hall because it was the biggest, and I gave it to him without argument because the move had been hard on him and I was picking my battles. I took the downstairs bedroom directly beneath the hallway. That detail matters. First 3 weeks were completely normal. I walked the house the way I always walk a new place. Checked the panel, looked at the plumbing where it was visible, got a sense of the bones. Everything was solid, well maintained for its age. I felt good about it. The dragging started in week 3. Thursday night, just at the edge of sleep. A sound from directly above me. Slow, deliberate. Something heavy being pulled across a hardwood floor. Unhurried. The way you'd move a piece of furniture if you were being careful about it. 20 seconds, maybe a little more. Then silence. I assumed Owen was rearranging something. I went to sleep. Friday night. Same sound. Same pace. I went upstairs and knocked, and Owen was in bed with his headphones on and hadn't moved anything. I went back downstairs. Saturday night, I went upstairs without knocking and stood in the dark hallway and listened. And what I noticed, standing there in my socks at 11 at night, was that the sound was not coming from Owen's room. It was coming from further down the hall, near the linen closet, from a stretch of hallway that led nowhere and contained nothing. I ran every check I know how to run. Vibration from the HVAC traveling through the floor joists ruled out. Animal in the wall cavity, no entry point, no droppings, no movement under the stethoscope. Structural shift from temperature change. Nothing that would produce a horizontal dragging sound on a consistent schedule. I got into the crawl space above the second floor ceiling and put my light on every inch of it. Nothing up there but old insulation and dust that had not been disturbed in a long time. I found nothing. For the first time in 23 years, I walked out of a house having run every check I knew and found nothing wrong with it. That feeling sat in my chest in a way I did not particularly enjoy. Owen thought it was funny at first. He started calling whatever it was the tenant. Has the tenant paid rent? That kind of thing. I let him have it because the alternative was having a conversation I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Then came the Tuesday night that changed things. Owen came downstairs just before midnight and sat at the kitchen table without saying anything. I looked at him and I knew immediately something had happened because Owen is 16 and 16-year-olds do not come downstairs at midnight to sit in silence unless something has genuinely rattled them. I asked him what was wrong. He said the dragging had started the same as always, down near the linen closet. But this time it didn't stop. Kept going. Moving slowly down the hallway toward his room. Getting closer. And then it stopped directly outside his bedroom door. He said he lay there for 10 minutes waiting. He said he did not open the door. I asked him why not. He looked at me and said he just didn't want to see. I have been doing this work for 23 years and I have never been afraid of what is behind a door or inside a wall because in my experience it is always something with a logical explanation and a repair cost. But sitting at that kitchen table at midnight looking at my son's face, I understood for the first time what it felt like to not want to open the door. To decide that not knowing was safer than knowing. Owen started locking his bedroom door after that. Didn't announce it. I just noticed the sound of the lock one night and didn't say anything. About 6 weeks in, I was out front on a Sunday morning when my neighbor came out to get her mail. She had lived next door for as long as anyone on the street could remember. 70s, small, the kind of woman who has watched the whole neighborhood change around her and made her peace with all of it. She looked at my house for a moment and said, without much introduction, "You've got the 2-story." I said yes. She said, "Does it do it upstairs?" I put down what I was holding. I said, "Does what do it upstairs?" She looked at me for a moment and then she said, "The previous owner was up there most nights. Couldn't sleep. She said she used to hear him when her own window was open. Said after he passed the sound kept going for a while and she figured it would stop eventually." I asked her if it had stopped. She looked at my house again with the particular expression of someone who already knows the answer to a question they are watching someone else figure out. She said she supposed that depended on who you asked. Then she picked up her mail and went inside. She did not tell me what the sound was. I want to be clear about that because it matters. She confirmed something was happening. She confirmed it had happened before I arrived. She gave me nothing that resolved it. I went upstairs after that conversation and I stood in the hallway and I looked at the floor more carefully than I had before. Near the linen closet, in the section where the sound always seemed to begin, there were two faint parallel marks worn into the hardwood. Old, smoothed down by time. Parallel lines, maybe 2 feet apart, the kind of marks that come from something being placed in the same spot and moved from the same spot enough times that the wood eventually just accepts it as permanent. I crouched down and ran my fingers along them. I did not know what made them. I still don't know for certain. I have my suspicion, and my suspicion fits the marks and the sound and the timing and the neighbor's face when she looked at my house. But a suspicion is not a diagnosis, and I have spent 23 years not calling something until I can prove it. What I can tell you is this. The dragging still happens. 3 for nights a week, always after 10, always that same slow, patient movement down the hall. Owen doesn't lock his door anymore. He said one night, very casually, that he didn't think it meant anything bad. I asked him what made him think that. He said it just didn't feel bad. It felt like something that had always been there and was just continuing. I didn't argue with him. Owen is 16 and mostly wrong about things, but occasionally he is more right than I am, and I have learned to recognize which is which. I still keep notes. Dates, times, duration, location. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm just documenting something that doesn't have a repair and logging it the way I log everything, because that is the only language I have. The marks in the floor are still there. I haven't touched them. I've thought about sanding them out and refinishing that section of hardwood, and every time I think about it I decide against it. Feels like the wrong thing to do. I can't tell you exactly why. It just does. 3 weeks after he submitted this, Terry sent one more message. He said the sound had moved. Not down the hallway anymore. Down the stairs. Getting closer to where he sleeps. He said he wasn't sure yet what that meant. He said he'd keep us posted.
My name is Warren, and the thing I keep coming back to, for years later, is the precision of it. Not the sound itself. The precision. Because sounds happen in houses all the time, and most of them have explanations, and I say that as someone who has spent 18 years crawling into the mechanical guts of buildings for a living. I know what houses sound like when they are working, and I know what they sound like when they are not, and I know the whole spectrum in between. What happened in my laundry room on that Tuesday morning did not belong anywhere on that spectrum. It belonged somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I don't have a professional category for. And the precision of it is the part that put it there. We had been in the house about 7 months when it happened. Double wide on a rural lot outside Beaumont. Good size for the 4 of us. Enough yard for the boys to do whatever it is boys do when you send them outside and tell them not to come back until dinner. My older one is Marcus. My younger one is called Dre. At the time Marcus was 11 and Dre was 8, and they were both at school on the morning this happened, which is relevant because what I am about to describe I experienced completely alone, and I want you to know that going in. No witnesses. Just me and whatever was on the other side of that wall. It was a Tuesday in March. I had a late start that day, a job that wasn't until 11, and I was doing laundry before I left. Standard morning. I was moving clothes from the washer to the dryer, and I was not thinking about anything in particular, the way you don't think about anything in particular when you are doing laundry, and then from the wall directly behind the dryer I heard a knock. One knock. Solid. Not a pipe tick or a settling sound or the dryer vibrating against something. A knock. The kind a knuckle makes on drywall when someone means to be heard. I stopped what I was doing and I looked at the wall. It was an exterior wall. I knew this because I had been in the crawl space under that section of the house during the first week after we moved in, checking the ductwork the previous owners had left in questionable condition. There was nothing on the other side of that wall except the gap between the house siding and the exterior paneling, and then open air, and then the yard. No pipe running through that section. No ductwork. No mechanical system of any kind. I knew this the way I know my own name. I stood there for a moment, and then I did what any reasonable person does when they hear an unexpected sound. I knocked back. 2 knocks, just with my knuckle against the drywall. 2 knocks came back. I want to describe what happened in my body in that moment because I think it is important and because I want to be honest about it. It was not fear exactly. It was more like the sensation of the floor becoming slightly less solid under your feet. A shift in the reliability of the immediate world. I stood there and I processed the two knocks that had just come back to me from inside an exterior wall that I personally knew contained nothing capable of making that sound, and I thought very clearly, that should not have happened. I told myself echo. I told myself the knock had traveled through the wall and reflected back from the exterior siding and returned to me at a delay that felt like a response but was just physics. I am an HVAC technician. I understand how sound moves through building materials. I told myself a story that fit inside my professional knowledge, and I mostly believed it. So I tested it. I knocked 3 times. Slow, evenly spaced. 1, 2, 3. From the wall, 1, 2, 3. I stood there for a moment. Then I knocked in a pattern. 2 quick knocks, a pause, then 1 slow knock. The kind of rhythm you'd use if you were knocking on a door and wanted someone to know it was you. From the wall, after a pause of maybe 2 seconds, 2 quick knocks. A pause. 1 slow knock. Exactly. Not approximately. Not close enough to explain away as coincidence or resonance or my own knock bouncing back at me through some acoustic quirk of the wall construction. Exactly. The pause in the middle was the same length. The difference in speed between the quick knocks and the slow knock was the same. If I had recorded both sequences and laid them on top of each other, they would have matched. I took a step back from the wall. I am going to tell you what I did not do, because I think it matters. I did not knock again. I stood there for probably 30 seconds and I looked at that wall and I made a decision, which was that I was not going to continue this. I don't know exactly what I was afraid of finding out. I just know that standing there in my laundry room on a Tuesday morning with a load of wet clothes half transferred to the dryer, something in me said stop, and I listened to it. I called my wife. She was at work and she answered on the second ring, and I told her what had happened, and there was a silence on the line that I recognized as the silence of a person deciding how to respond to something they do not want to engage with. She asked me if I was sure. I said yes. She asked me if it could have been an echo. I said I had already considered that. She was quiet for another moment and then she said, and I remember this very precisely, she said, "Warren, please don't knock on that wall again." I said okay. She said, "I mean it. Don't engage with it. Whatever it is, don't engage with it." I said okay again, and we hung up and I finished transferring the laundry and I left for my job at 11, and I did not knock on that wall again. Now I want to tell you about the part that happened after, because I think people who hear this story tend to focus on the knocking and miss the part that I actually find more unsettling, which is what happened when I tried to find out what was behind that wall. I went into the crawl space that weekend. I took my work light, the good one, the one I use when I need to see into tight corners on a job, and I got under the house and I made my way to the section beneath the laundry room. I knew this space. I had been in it before. I knew the layout of what was down there. I found the section of subfloor beneath the laundry room and I shone my light along the exterior wall framing from the inside. I looked at every inch of it. The wall cavity between the interior drywall and the exterior siding was exactly what it had always been. Empty. Insulation bats, intact, undisturbed. No gap large enough for an animal. No evidence of anything having been in there. The insulation on the interior face of that wall was clean and flat and had the specific undisturbed look of something that has not been touched since it was installed. I lay under my house for a while with my work light on that wall, and I thought about precision. About the pause between the quick knocks and the slow knock being exactly the length I had made it. About the difference in tempo being exactly what I had used. About the 2-second delay before the response, which was consistent every time, which suggested something receiving the knock and then producing a response rather than an immediate mechanical reflection. I thought about all of that in the crawl space under my house on a Saturday afternoon, and then I got out from under the house and I went inside and I did not go back. I want to tell you the knocking came back. I want to give you an escalation, but the truth is that it never happened again. Not once. We lived in that house for another 2 years before we moved, and in that time I heard a lot of sounds in that house, and I investigated every one of them the way I always do, and every single one of them had an explanation. Pipes, ductwork, the dryer moving slightly on its pad, the boys running through rooms they had been told not to run through. Normal sounds. Explainable sounds. Just the one morning, just the one wall, just that one precise and patient and impossible exchange. My wife has never asked me about it again. I have not brought it up. It is the kind of thing that sits in a corner of your memory and does not move and does not grow and does not go away. It is just there. A Tuesday in March in the laundry room. One knock and then everything that followed from it. Marcus is 15 now. Dre is 12. Neither of them ever knew it happened. I kept it from them the same way you keep certain things from your kids. Not to protect them from being scared, but to protect them from learning too early that there are questions the adults in their life cannot answer. Because there are. There are questions that don't have answers, and most of the time you can organize your life so you don't have to look directly at them. That morning I looked directly at one. I knocked on it. It knocked back. And then I stopped knocking, and I went to work, and I have been going to work ever since. Warren ended his submission with one line that he said he almost deleted before sending. He said, "The thing that bothers me most is that it stopped when I stopped. Like it was waiting for me to go first. Like it had been waiting a long time." My name is Octavia, and the first thing I want to tell you is that I am the person in my friend group who explains things. Not in an annoying way, I hope, but I am naturally the one who finds the logical answer when everyone else is ready to assume the worst. Water stain on the ceiling, I will tell you it is a slow leak from the unit above, not a sign, not a warning, just a slow leak. Strange smell in the hallway, I will tell you it is probably someone's cooking coming through the ventilation, not gas, not something dead, just someone's cooking. I say this because I want you to understand that I came into this situation as a person who was actively looking for the boring explanation. I wanted the boring explanation. I looked for it longer than I should have. And when I finally stopped being able to find it, the feeling that replaced it was not one I have fully put down since. I moved into the building 2 years ago. A high rise on the south side of Charlotte, 12 floors, the kind of building that has a gym on the second floor that nobody uses and a leasing office with a fish tank and a woman behind the desk who knows everyone's name and none of their business. I was on the 6th floor. My apartment was 6B. Directly above me, on the 7th floor, was apartment 7B, which the building management told me during my walkthrough had been vacant for 18 months following a fire. They told me it was gutted and sealed and undergoing a slow renovation process that had stalled due to a contractor dispute. They told me I would not hear anything from up there. They told me not to worry about it. I was not worried about it. I had a new job, a new city, a 6th floor apartment with a view I liked, and absolutely no reason to think about the burned-out unit directly above my bedroom ceiling. The first time I heard it, I was in bed on a Wednesday night about 3 weeks after I moved in. I had been asleep and something brought me partway back up. Not all the way, just that half-conscious state where you are aware of the room around you but your body has not committed to being awake yet. And in that state I heard, from above, a low sound, not loud enough to have woken me fully, just present enough to have reached whatever part of the brain stays listening even when the rest of you is asleep. A human voice. Low, tuneless, the kind of sound a person makes when they are alone and not aware they are making any sound at all. Not singing. Not humming a melody. Something less deliberate than that. The vocal equivalent of background noise, except it was coming from a ceiling above an apartment that had been sealed for 18 months after a fire. I lay there and I listened, and it continued for maybe 2 minutes, and then it stopped and I went back to sleep. In the morning I filed it under half dream and did not think about it again. Came back the following Wednesday. Same time, same quality, same 2 minutes, and then nothing. I lay there awake this time and I listened to it properly, and I thought about the building's ventilation system, about how sound travels through shared ductwork in high rises, about how a voice from a completely different floor could potentially be channeled through the HVAC infrastructure and arrive at my ceiling sounding like it originated there. I thought about all of that. I almost convinced myself. Almost. Because the thing about the ventilation theory is that it requires a source. Someone, somewhere in the building, making that sound at that specific time on Wednesday nights. And the sound had a quality I kept coming back to when I tried to pin it down. It was not the sound of someone in a living room or a kitchen, with the background texture of a lived-in space around them. It had a specific emptiness to it, a flatness, the acoustic quality of a voice in a room with no furniture, no soft surfaces, nothing to absorb the sound. A gutted room. I called the building management office on a Thursday morning. I told the woman with the fish tank that I was hearing something from the unit above me and I wanted to know if there was any contractor activity happening up there. She checked something on her computer and told me no, the unit was still sealed, No work had been scheduled, no one had access. I told her I was hearing something anyway. She told me she would log it and someone would follow up. Nobody followed up. The sound came back the next Wednesday. And the one after that. Always the same night. Always the same approximate time. Always that same quality of a voice in an empty room, low and continuous and not quite reaching the threshold of something you could call a sound with intention behind it. I want to tell you I handled this calmly throughout. I want to tell you it was an intellectual puzzle I was working through systematically. What actually happened is that I started sleeping badly on Tuesday nights because some part of me was already waiting. I started lying in the dark on Wednesday nights with my eyes open before it started because my body had learned the schedule before my conscious mind had admitted there was one. I started waking up on Thursday mornings with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been braced for something all night. I did not tell my friends. I did not tell my coworkers. I went to work every day and did my job and came home and lay in my bed on Wednesday nights and listened to a sound coming from a burned and sealed apartment above my head, and I kept looking for the boring explanation and I kept not finding it. 6 weeks in, I decided to go upstairs myself. I want to be clear about what I was expecting. I was expecting to knock on a fire-taped door and hear nothing and confirm for myself that the sound was traveling from somewhere else entirely and my brain had been mislocating it. I was expecting to feel slightly foolish and go back downstairs and sleep properly for the first time in a month. That is what I was expecting. I took the elevator to the 7th floor on a Thursday evening after work. The hallway was identical to mine except that at the far end, where 7B was, there was a difference. A management notice on the door, yellow paper in a plastic sleeve. Fire tape across the frame in 2 places, the serious kind they use on job sites, not the decorative kind. A smell in that section of the hallway that was faint but specific. The particular cold smell of a fire that happened long enough ago that the sharp part is gone but the underneath of it remains. I stood in front of the door for a moment. And then, because I had come up there to do something and I had not done it yet, I knocked. 3 knocks. Standard. The kind you use when you are reasonably sure nobody is home, but you are being polite about it anyway. Nothing. I stood there. I was about to turn around and go back to the elevator when I heard it. Not from inside the apartment. From directly on the other side of the door. Close. The same low, continuous sound I had been hearing through my ceiling for 6 weeks. Except now there was no ceiling between us, no floor, no 18 inches of building material to filter it. Just the door. Just the fire tape and the yellow management notice and whatever was on the other side making a sound that a person makes when they are alone in a room and do not know anyone is listening. I did not knock again. I did not say anything. I stood in that hallway for a moment and then I went back to the elevator and I pressed 6 and I went back to my apartment and I sat on my couch with my coat still on for a while. The next morning I called the management office again. This time I told them I had gone upstairs and I had heard something directly behind the door of 7B and I needed someone to open it and check. There was a longer pause than the first time. The woman said she would send maintenance up that day. A maintenance worker named Carl came to my door that afternoon and asked me to come with him. We took the elevator to 7 together. He had a key on a building ring and he cut the fire tape with a box cutter, both pieces, and unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell came out first. That cold underneath of fire smell, stronger now, filling the hallway. And then the visual of the apartment itself, which I was not prepared for even though I had been told what it was. Black walls, black ceiling, the particular texture of surfaces that have been through fire and survived it in the worst possible way, charred and bubbled and stripped of everything that made them livable. No furniture, no fixtures. The windows intact but filmed with a gray residue that turned the afternoon light into something flat and directionless. A gutted room. Exactly the acoustic space I had been imagining for 6 weeks. Empty. Carl walked the perimeter with his flashlight. Every room, every closet, every corner. He came back to the front door where I was standing and he looked at me and he did not say it was nothing. He did not give me the reassuring speech I had been half expecting. He just said, "Door's been sealed since the remediation. Nobody's had a key except the office." He locked it again. He did not replace the fire tape. He walked to the elevator and I followed him and we rode down to 6 in silence and he got out at the lobby without saying anything else. I went back to my apartment and I looked up the fire. It was not hard to find. A building fire 18 months prior, 6th floor unit 6B. I registered that and sat with it for a moment. The coincidence of the unit number ruled accidental. A single occupant. A woman named Dorothea, 61 years old, who had lived alone in that apartment for 11 years. The fire started in the kitchen late at night. The investigation noted that neighbors had reported smelling smoke after noticing that a sound they associated with Dorothea's apartment had stopped. A sound they described in the report as someone talking quietly to themselves. A sound they had heard so consistently for so long that its absence at 2 in the morning was what made them check. The sound stopping was the warning. The silence was the alarm. I read that 3 times. I thought about Wednesday nights, about a sound that arrived on a schedule and lasted 2 minutes and then stopped. About the way I had learned to wait for it and what it felt like when it ended. About standing in a hallway in front of a sealed door and hearing it from the other side and doing nothing. About Carl's face in the elevator. I moved out 2 months later. Not immediately, not in a panic, but deliberately and with a specific intention, which was to put as much building material between myself and apartment 7B as the city of Charlotte would allow. I have a ground floor apartment now in a different building entirely. No upstairs neighbors. No shared ceilings. No Wednesday nights lying in the dark waiting for something to start. What I think about now, when I think about it, is Dorothea. 61 years old, 11 years in that apartment, talking quietly to herself in the way people who live alone sometimes do, because silence is a thing you can only tolerate in so much quantity before you need to push back against it a little. Talking to herself for 11 years in a room that learned the sound of her. A room that 18 months after she was gone was still holding on to it. I do not know what I believe about that. I am still the person who looks for the boring explanation. I am still the one who finds the slow leak, identifies the cooking smell, locates the logical source. I just have not located this one yet. I am not sure I want to. She sent one follow-up after submitting. She said, I looked up Dorothea's full name. I found a photo. I have not been able to stop thinking about the fact that she was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who talked to herself at night, because that is what people do when they are alone and the world has gotten very quiet around them. She deserved better than what happened to her. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I just needed to say it somewhere.
I want to be honest with you about something before I start. I'm not a superstitious man. I've driven 4 million miles across this country. I've seen black ice take a 53-foot trailer sideways at 60 miles an hour. I've watched a tornado cross an open field in Kansas close enough to rattle my mirrors. None of that made me lose sleep. What I'm about to tell you still does. My house sits about 12 miles outside Flagstaff on a flat stretch of land that doesn't look like much. 1-story ranch, 3 rooms, a kitchen with a square table, and 4 chairs I never all use. It was a good deal when I bought it. The realtor said the land used to be some kind of commercial staging area, old company lot, nothing fancy. I didn't ask many questions. When you're on the road 2 weeks out of every 4, a house is mostly just a place to put your mail. I noticed it the 3rd time I came home. I'd been out 17 days on a northern run, Montana, then down through Wyoming, then back west. Long haul. I got in around 11 at night, ate standing over the sink, and fell asleep on the couch without even pulling the blinds. Around 1:30 in the morning, something woke me. Not a bang, not a crash, just a sound. The low, specific scrape of a wooden chair being pulled away from a table. Slow and deliberate, the way a person sits down when they're tired. I lay still for a moment. Then I got up, turned the kitchen light on, and stood in the doorway. Nothing, for chairs all pushed in. The table empty. I checked the locks. Both doors, the 2 windows that open. Everything latched. I told myself the house had settled. Old foundation, cold night. I went back to sleep. But it happened the next night too. Same time, give or take. Same sound. Not a bang. Not the house popping in the cold. The deliberate pull of a chair. Unmistakable if you've ever sat in a kitchen at 1 in the morning and needed to rest for a minute. I know that sound. I've made that sound in diners from here to Delaware. I started to keep track. Every night I was home once around that hour. Never twice. Never any other noise following it. Just the chair, and then silence deep enough to make your ears ring. I called my neighbor. She has a key and checks the place twice a week when I'm gone. I asked her gently had she noticed anything, heard anything. She said no, nothing. The house sat quiet. She walked through it each time. The sound never happened when I wasn't there. That was when it stopped being a house-settling problem. I started sleeping on the couch. I told myself it was so I could be closer to the kitchen if it happened again, close enough to move fast. But honestly, and I didn't let myself think too hard about this at the time, I think I just didn't want to be far from it. Whatever it wasn't hostile. It was just there, patient, present in a way I couldn't explain and couldn't quite bring myself to leave alone. 6 weeks in, on a Wednesday night in late November, I was lying on that couch in the dark, not asleep, watching the ceiling. I'd been home 2 days and hadn't heard it yet, and that absence was somehow worse than hearing it. At 1:47, the chair moved. I heard the scrape across the linoleum, heard the weight settle, the small creak of wood adjusting to a load. And then, underneath the silence, something I hadn't heard before. A slow exhale, quiet and tired. The breath of a man who has been driving for a very long time. I sat up. I reached for the lamp on the end table. I want to be careful here because I don't want to oversell this. I turned on the light. I looked at the kitchen table, and there was a man sitting in the chair closest to the window, his hands flat on the table, looking directly at me. He was in his 50s, weathered, the kind of weathered that isn't from sun alone, but from years of early mornings and cold windshields and bad coffee. He wore a canvas work shirt, dark at the collar. His hair was thick and gray at the temples. He wasn't translucent. He wasn't hazy. He was sitting in my kitchen chair the way anyone sits when they're too tired to be anywhere else. We looked at each other. I don't know how long it lasted. Felt like a long time. My heart was going, but my body was still, not frozen, just waiting. Waiting for him to speak or move or disappear. He spoke. "I always sit here," he said. His voice was even. Not a threat. Not a question. Just a man telling you something true that he assumed you already knew. I blinked. The chair was empty, pushed in tight to the table. The kitchen exactly as I'd left it. I sat on the couch until morning. I didn't tell anyone for almost 2 weeks. When I finally called my mother, I didn't even start with the story. I just described him. The way he looked, the canvas shirt, the set of his jaw, the way his hands had been flat on the table, not gripping it, just resting. Still, the way a man's hands rest when he's too tired to hold anything anymore. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Hold on." She came back to the phone and told me to check my email. She'd taken a picture of a picture, one of those old Polaroids that had lived in a shoebox for 40 years. Took a moment to load. Grainy, small. A man standing beside a truck in a gravel lot, squinting into afternoon light. I recognized the jawline before I recognized the rest. My father died when I was 9. Massive coronary on a run through New Mexico. I barely remember his voice. I remember the smell of his jacket and the way he'd let me sit in the cab when he came home, pretending to steer, and that's most of what I have of him. He was a trucker, long haul, same as me. He worked for a regional outfit out of Flagstaff, and in the late 70s and early 80s, they used to park and stage overnight on a flat stretch of commercial land off the highway, 12 miles outside the city. I have never once in my adult life looked into what that land used to be. I didn't need to after that. My mother asked if I was frightened. I thought about the question honestly. The man in the chair hadn't come at me, hadn't reached for me, hadn't said anything that was meant to scare. He just said what was true. He always sat there, long before the house, long before me. He sat there because it was the only still place in a life spent moving, and he was still moving, or some part of him was, and sometimes between 1:30 and 2 in the morning he needed to sit down. I told her no. I wasn't frightened. What I still am when I lie on that couch and listen for the sound, is something that doesn't have a clean word for it. It's not grief exactly. Grief is about absence. This is something else. The particular ache of being in the same room as someone you never got enough time with, and knowing that the time you're getting now is also not enough and probably never will be. I still hear the chair sometimes. I don't get up anymore. I just lie still and listen to the exhale and feel, more than I have felt in a long time, like a son. My uncle left me a house I'd never spent a night in. 40 acres of Nebraska sandhills, a weathered 2-story farmhouse, and a will that said simply, "It's yours now, Ray. You'll understand." I was 53 years old, 30 years in contracting behind me, and I had no idea what he meant by that last part. I do now. I still don't know if understanding it has helped. The drive out was long and flat and beautiful in the way Nebraska always is. Sky so wide it makes you feel small in the best possible sense. The house sat at the end of a gravel road, 2 cottonwoods flanking it like sentinels, white paint peeling in long strips. I pulled up in the late afternoon, walked every room, checked the roof, the framing, the joists. Contractor's habit. The bones were good. Solid work from 1941, my uncle had told me once. Built to last. I went to sleep that first night thinking about what I'd fix first. I woke at 2 a.m. to a sound I couldn't name. Low, tuneless, coming from beneath me, not from below the bedroom, but from the living room at the end of the hall. I lay still for a moment, the way you do when a sound reaches you in sleep and you're still deciding whether it's real. It was real. A hum, almost but not quite mechanical, almost but not quite vocal. Something in between. I got up, walked to the living room, stood in the dark and listened. It was coming from the floor. One specific board near the east wall, the third plank from the baseboard, maybe 6 feet long, running parallel to the window. I told myself, old house, old pipes, furnace cycling. I went back to bed. In the morning, I checked the furnace. Gas unit, replaced in 2009, running clean. No pipes ran under that section of the living room. I pulled the floor plan my uncle had filed with the county and confirmed it. Nothing mechanical anywhere near that board.
No aqueducto, no plumbing, no electrical conduit.
I noted it, told myself I'd get under the house and look around. That afternoon, I took a flashlight into the crawl space. The farmhouse had no basement, just a shallow 18-inch gap between the subfloor and the earth. Tight, dusty, laced with old cobwebs that hadn't been disturbed in years. I army crawled my way to the spot directly beneath the living room's east wall. Dry dirt, no moisture damage, no evidence of pest intrusion, no animal nesting, no settling cracks in the foundation sill. I tapped the soil, solid. I pressed my palm flat against it and held it there for a long time. Nothing. That night, the hum came back. I want to be precise about this because precision is what I do. 30 years of reading blueprints, pulling permits, signing off on structural assessments. I am not a man who panics, and I am not a man who imagines things. I am a man who, when faced with a problem, makes a list of causes and eliminates them one by one until he finds the answer. That is what I did. That is all I did. For 18 months. By the end of the second week, I had established the pattern. The hum began between 1:30 and 2:15 a.m., always from the same location, always the same pitch, always lasting between 40 minutes and 2 hours. It did not correlate with weather. It did not correlate with temperature. It did not change when the furnace was off, when the electricity was off, when I killed the water at the main. It hummed the night I sat in that room with every system in the house completely shut down. My breath visible in the February cold. The only light a battery lantern. Sitting there in the silence of a dead house with that sound rising through the floor was the first time I felt something I'm reluctant to call fear but can't honestly call anything else. In March, I pulled the board. I had resisted this for weeks because I knew what I'd find, which was nothing. And once I confirmed nothing, I wasn't sure where I'd go next. Pulled it anyway.
Bare dirt beneath, undisturbed.
I took soil samples, sent them to an AG lab in Lincoln. Standard composition. No unusual mineral content. No gas pockets. No evidence of decomposition or organic material beyond what you'd expect. The lab report came back clean, and I read it twice in my truck in the parking lot, and then sat there for a while looking at the Sandhills horizon. I brought in a structural engineer in April. Good one, had worked with him on commercial projects in Omaha. He spent a full day in and around the house, checking load paths, the foundation, the crawl space. His report, structurally sound, nothing anomalous. He heard the hum when he stayed into the evening. He didn't say much about it. Just wrote in his notes. Localized acoustic phenomenon, source unidentified. I've kept that report. I called the County Historical Society in June. A woman came out with a folder of old maps and survey records and told me what my uncle had apparently known but never mentioned. The farmhouse was built on top of an older structure. A root cellar, probably 1890s, that had been filled in and built over. She said this like it explained something. I asked her what it explained. She looked at the floor for a moment and said she wasn't sure. The ground-penetrating radar survey cost me $1,100 and 3 weeks of waiting. A geology team from the university ran it in August. They confirmed the cellar outline, roughly 12 by 14 feet, 7 feet deep, centered almost exactly beneath the living room's east wall. They also confirmed that the fill was solid, completely, uniformly solid. No voids, no settling gaps, no air pockets. Whatever had been in that cellar was gone, and the earth above it was undisturbed and had been for a very long time. The hum continued. I want you to understand what it felt like to stand in that living room the night after I got the radar results. I had done everything right. I had brought in the right people, asked the right questions, spent real money on real science. I had the soil tests and the engineering report and the historical records and the radar images spread on my kitchen table like a case that had been solved. Except it hadn't been, except the one thing that needed explaining was still beneath that board every night, still humming, still nothing. There is a particular loneliness in being a competent person faced with something that competence cannot touch. My daughter thinks I should sell. I've thought about it. I've stood in the driveway at night and tried to picture it, the for sale sign, the handshake, the drive back to Omaha. I don't do it. I'm not entirely sure why. Partly stubbornness, the contractor in me refusing to walk away from an unsolved problem. Partly something else I don't examine too closely. My uncle lived here for 22 years. He left it to me and said you'll understand. I wonder now if understanding it doesn't mean knowing what it is. Maybe it means something smaller. Maybe it means learning to be a person who can sit across the room from something inexplicable and just let it be inexplicable. Maybe that's what he spent 22 years figuring out, and maybe that's the only inheritance that actually matters. I still live in the house. The living room is fine during the day, good light, good bones, the kind of room you'd want to read in. I've moved the armchair in there. I've had coffee at the window watching the cottonwoods in the morning. But I don't go in that room at night. The hum is still there. I've stopped expecting it to stop. If the story settled somewhere in your chest and didn't leave, that's exactly why Unheard Fears exists. Every story here is real, unexplained, and told by the people who lived it. No resolutions. No comfort. Just the truth that some things stay with you whether you want them to or not. Subscribe, stay close, and remember, the most frightening sounds are the ones nobody can explain.